We're going to start off today by looking at the US jobs report, released late last week. It shows a very interesting story. The US has been on track for now 93 months of straight job growth, which a record-setting trend. However, what we're seeing is a second story that's playing underneath all this, and that's job participation, labour force participation in the US. Fact of the matter is, the US, like a lot of Western countries, is getting old. The average population is getting very old and there's less people in the workforce. And if you look at stats like this, you see that in the late 90s, we had a peak of about 65% of people in the workforce. And since then, there's been a decline. Despite women really joining in the workforce, overall, men have been going down and now women have peaked their rate of workforce participation. And we're seeing a lack of people actually taking part in the workforce. Now, what does this mean? This means that the era in which there was plentiful supply for labour, there was plentiful supply for workers, is coming to an end. And theoretically, it could mean that the employed salaryman, such as you and I, could be looking at a future in which our labour is incredibly valuable.
Oh, so that's good news.
Yeah, it could be. It could be good news.
Are you saying that there's a raise in my future?
Possibly. The other alternative is we take the route of Japan and Korea, mass automation, and we're all out of a job. So robots are putting us out of a job, or we're getting some fantastic wages.
There were some good numbers there for Trump, weren't there, in this job report?
Oh, absolutely right. There are great numbers.
And can we start saying that he can take credit for it? Because I always say, well, this is something that you inherited from Obama.
Right. Well, this is a difficult thing to play on. Whether any one president can take credit for the state of a particular element of the economy, it's hard to say, Ami. Like, every president will try and take advantage of the good and blame their predecessor for the bad. But regardless, what we've seen is this 93 months of straight job growth, unprecedented in the history of the United States.
Good news. What can I say?
And now, turning more towards Israel, we see another story also playing out, also related to jobs and wages. So, OECD report coming out late last week, talking about developed countries and around the world, shows that Israel actually has the widest wage gap in the developed world. Israel in a unique and, I suppose, auspicious position of having the ratio between those in the top 10% and the bottom 10% being the biggest gap in the absolute world. It's a real problem in Israel that there seems to be a large percentage of people known as the working poor. Now, these are people who participate in the workforce. We're not talking unemployed. We're talking people who go to work, do their 9 to 6 or whatever hours they might be able to do, and yet are still living at or near or below even the poverty line.
That also coincides with the fact that the unemployment rate is so low in Israel.
Exactly right.
A lot of people are working.
Israel has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the OECD, currently standing at 4.2%. It's the envy of most of the world. The OECD average is around 5.8%. So there are a lot of countries out there that would be pretty envious of this working rate. Yet despite that, there are still a lot of people living in poverty. Now, why is that, Ami? Because of a lack of skilled labour. Now, we've got in Israel a bit of a two-track economy. You hear a lot about the startup nation. Israel's a nation filled with, startup technology, high-tech. But you've got to be trained for that. And not only trained for that, trained well. And that takes a lot of investment, a lot of input, and that's something that Israel doesn't do particularly well for large segments of its economy. The Arab community, the ultra-religious, these groups tend to be left behind when it comes to these high-skilled positions where desperately Israel needs people to fill the jobs.
I think that's what the Prime Minister has been saying all the time. He's always taken pride in how he has made Israel's economy grow. And that's right, the numbers show that Israel's economy is growing. But there isn't that trickle-down effect.
Exactly right.
To those percentages at the bottom of the ladder. They're not gaining from all that wealth that is coming into the country.
Their wages have completely stagnated. It's unbelievable to see the level of stagnation in that wage growth, while simultaneously those in the top percentage, particularly in high-tech, in finance, are seeing massive booms. The real estate market in this country is off the charts, but when you have wages stagnating and the property prices booming, you get a massive displacement where people at the bottom end just simply are priced out of the market and can't afford to access.
Fascinating and very disconcerting numbers, I have to say.
Absolutely right.
And what else do you have for us?
So finally, we're going to end on a little bit more of a positive note. So we've painted a bit of a negative picture of some elements of the global economy, but let's take a look now at the UK specifically. The UK is seeing a small boost in its retail sector over the last few months, particularly driven now by the World Cup. So it's interestingly enough, you don't necessarily...
We're seeing the numbers on this.
Exactly. Interestingly, you don't necessarily think of the World Cup as an economic booster, but what we've seen over the last few months, you see since the summer began in May, when we had the latest full complete month numbers coming out, but that's continued into June and now is continuing into July, a massive boom in the retail sector.
Amazing.
The Brits are spending. Why?
Why?
Because the weather is warm, there's activities going on, and the nation feels proud and outgoing. You had the wedding, the royal wedding back in May.
Doing well in the World Cup.
Absolutely right. So we've seen massive retail growth. The governor of the Bank of England came out just this week stating that if he thinks that if England makes it all the way through to the finals, there'll be an over 5% boost in retail sales, particularly in the grocery department, and particularly in that most auspicious of all goods, alcohol.
Oh, and I'm sure the Leave campaigners are going to say it's proof that Brexit is good for the country.
Exactly.